want to start by bringing you greetings from Silicon Valley. Silicon Valley has been complimented here today by almost every entrepreneur I've heard and every speaker as a center of innovation and a center of new ideas and center of entrepreneurship. But you know what it really is? It's a center of capital for growth companies. It's a center of money. It's a center of the place that attracts the people that need the capital to grow the businesses, to make the money, to fund more companies, that grow more companies. It is a synergistic relationship between money and people with ambition. Last night I had the joy of having dinner hosted by the Royal Bank of Scotland chairman for Scotland, and he spoke to you this morning. He represents money. He happens to be very low-risk money. Money that's not available to anybody in this room unless you're going to get a mortgage. So as an entrepreneur, your number one job is to go get the money. If you can't do that, you don't have a business. You don't have a business, you don't have employees, you don't have a product, you don't have customers, you don't have anything. Your number one job is go get the money. When I was 25 years old, I was a fellow that had done 6 leverage buyouts. My partners were a couple of very famous guys in Los Angeles. I was an associate. We built up the large cement company, sold it to Beazer PLC in London. They both retired, and I was 25 years old. Not about to retire. So I went around and talked to some mentors. And one of the guys I was able to get in with was a billionaire. His name was on the top of some buildings in Los Angeles. Very famous guy. And if you go to UCLA, you'll see the John Anderson School of Business. It was John Anderson was the guy I met with. I was 25 years old. And he said, Eric, I was an accountant when I was young. I was in the Army when I was young. And I was a lawyer when I was young. And at age 45, I finally figured out that for the rest of my life, I was going to work for somebody else, unless I could figure out how to raise money. And he said, at the age 45, I decided I could become an entrepreneur and I could actually employ other people if I could raise money. And he did. John Anderson's name is on the UCLA School of Business because at age 46, he bought the beer distributor called the Budweiser Company, you might know that name, in Los Angeles. And it was a bit of a troubled business. And he and a partner bought it. And over the course of the next 20 years, built it up into a fantastic franchise, funding real estate and a bunch of other things he ended up owning. And now John has his name on a business building as he's giving money back to the community. But at age 45, he had spent his entire life not figuring out the basic element that he communicated to me when I was 25, which was, Eric, someday you're going to decide that you can go get the money. And the day you do that, you're an entrepreneur. Just figure out when it's going to be. When you're 25, when you're 45, when you're 65. You know, the Kentucky Fried Chicken Foundation, a franchise, was founded by a guy who was almost 70 years old. You know it as KFC, and it's owned by Pepsi-Cola. But that guy was 70 years old when he became an entrepreneur. What do entrepreneurs do? I went to Harvard Business School, graduated with some degree of something, and one of the things I took away was managers manage resources that are currently under their control. Scotland has a tremendous number of managers who are excellent at doing it. Some of them manage money. And they do very conservative investments in mostly foreign countries. And so the economic value of their investment is mostly in Brazil or some other place. They're betting on some currency or whatever. But they're managing resources currently under their control. What do entrepreneurs do? They manage resources that are not currently under their control. How do you do that? I don't currently control capital. I currently don't control people, land, or technology. Those, by the way, are the 4 elements of building an economy. So what does an entrepreneur do? Through purely the passion and wildly optimistic view of the world that they carry, they create a future that's different than today. And sitting in this room are many of the types of personalities that can be crazy enough to actually say, you're right, I don't have the money, I don't have the people working for me. I don't have the land, and I don't have the technology, but I know how the world could be better. And I'm going to use my ability to communicate, to lead people, to add value, so I can obtain the money, the people, the capital, and the technology. One of the presentations today was by a guy who named his company Bad Idea. And then the first thing he said was, the premise of his company is there's no such thing as a bad idea. And I actually wrote down a little funny note. I said, there's no such thing as my company. Because the name of his company is Bad Idea. And I liked the humor of that. I thought that was kind of funny. But you know what a kid at Harvard did when his girlfriend broke up with him? You guys all know the story. He came up with a really, really bad idea. He took two sorority girls' pictures and put them up and said, let's compare them. Tell me which one's prettier. And then he put two more up and two more up. And before you know it, all the Harvard fraternity boys were voting on which girls were prettier. A terrible idea for a boy at Harvard, right? You're guaranteed that everyone except for whoever comes out on top is going to hate your guts. The name of that company is Facebook. The name of the entrepreneur is Mark Zuckerberg. The girlfriend's long gone. But I do subscribe to the notion that entrepreneurs often come up with really bad ideas. And they usually come up with them and they fantasize about how great it would be if this happens or that happens. And I would like today to tell you a couple of stories about some things I've done, some of which, in retrospect, were bad ideas. They all turned out okay, so I wouldn't tell you the story if it wouldn't, but other ones were great ideas and had to be executed on. But I want to talk to you about, in every situation, I did not control the resources that were required in order to execute. And in this room, your major frustration is going to be you do not have the key resource, which is money, that is used to then acquire the other resources, which are largely perceived as commodities. And I want to hopefully give you a takeaway today of how you can approach your life so that those are not the constraints you live by. And if we do this correctly today, you're going to change this country. You're going to change this culture. You're going to say, we are from Scotland, and that gives us an advantage. Not, we're from Scotland, therefore we have an excuse on why we can't execute. I grew up on a farm in Central Valley. Central Valley, California is one of the most prolific agricultural areas in the world, actually. And I grew up on a mile-square chunk of real estate. It was an alfalfa field. Alfalfa is fed to cows. But inherently, alfalfa is not a very high-revenue product. And when I was a kid, I inherited that from my grandmother when I was a teenager. And when I went to college, my brothers and I had a business running an alfalfa field. And for many of my fellow students, they still own alfalfa fields. But my brothers and I had traveled around. I'd lived in a kibbutzim in Israel, lived in Alaska a little bit. I'd gone to Russia when I was 14, president of a U.S. delegation to Russia. And I was not satisfied with an alfalfa field. I really said there's got to be something better to do with this mile square chunk of land we've got. And so we found that if you turn it into organic alfalfa is known as hay, by the way, you could make more money. So we spent 3 years and got rid of the fertilizers and pesticides and learned about organics and started selling to organic dairies. And then discovered that organic dairies are really, really, really small, 50 cows or 100 cows. Why? Because they have to walk to pasture every day. And so you didn't want to walk a mile to pasture, so you had a small dairy with small pasture. And so we said, you know what? This is a permanent global problem. If you're going to have organic pastures and organic dairies, it's going to be a small business. So my brother came to me. He'd spent 15 years in medicine. He said, Eric, I've come up with a design for a mobile milk barn. Now, we'd had some dairies when I was a kid. They were all in one place. The idea you'd move the milk barn around was a little bit innovative. And he said, just give me about $1.5 million, and we'll build this mobile milk barn, and we'll take our entire 400 acres and make the whole thing into a dairy, with the cows just moving around the 400 acres, and we'll move our milk barn along with it. I, of course, consulted with the people that knew about this business, and they all said, that's the nuttiest idea. That is a bad idea. Think about contamination and all the problems you're going to have and water and power. Terrible idea. But if you do it, you're going to end up with 1,000 cows where everybody else has 50 cows. And so I put up a $1.7 million, and we built this device, and my brother went out and did it. Here's what we discovered from our really bad idea, which, by the way, is fundamentally just a way to get a scalable organic business. We discovered that not only could we have a lot more cows, but the milk that we produce didn't have bacteria on it. Because the cows weren't standing in manure all day long. They were walking around in pasture. And what happens when you have milk that doesn't have bacteria in it? You can sell it as raw milk. We then built a bottling plant. We built a cheese plant. We built distribution warehouses around California. We ended up with 25 distribution trucks. We ended up with 85 employees. We ended up with chain retail stores selling what product? Raw milk. Organic Pastures Dairy Company today has a 98% market share. I say 98 because it's technically 100, but it sounds really bad when you say that. We own the raw milk, raw cheese, raw butter business in the state of California. 36 million people buy from one company. It's the alfalfa company my brothers and I inherited when we were teenagers. But we sought to add value at every layer, and now Organic Pastures Dairy Company does about $10 million in revenue, makes $100,000 or $200,000 a month of profits. Don't put that on the internet, please. I don't want my customers to know that. And has no competitors. We own the product from the cow all the way through our distribution channel, all the way to when you would buy it off the retail store shelves. Now, what did that teach me? Oh, by the way, it only took me about 20 years for that experience. Once we got in the dairy business, and 15 years before it, added up, that's a 35-year experience. That's 35 years. What does that tell you, though? It taught me a lot about venture capital, because that's all venture capital is. Take what everybody else sees, which is an alfalfa field, and then just increment it a little bit, and then increment it a little bit, and increment it a little bit. And before you know it, you've got intellectual property and brand and distribution channel and proprietary products and all the stuff that a venture capitalist actually funded. You know what? You could call them venture capitalists, but they're actually leveraged buyout guys. Out of New York, fly into town, and they say, we want to buy your business. Here's a $50 million deal, and da-da-da-da-da-da-da. All the stuff you'd see out of a regular Silicon Valley software company is happening to our little dairy. Same chunk of real estate as any other guy in Silicon Valley, in Central Valley. Add value. I'm going to make 2 points in this presentation. Number one is add value. If you're an entrepreneur and you don't add value, you're not going to get anything done. If you can't tell me in one sentence what you're going to do to add value, you're never going to get funded. Number one, add value. Second story. There's a guy from Central Valley ran for, what was his title? Secretary of State of California. He was the top guy in California for 8 years. And he ran for governor in 2002. And he called me after he'd run, and I'd given him some money and said, you're going to lose. Call me when you're done. It pissed him off. And he called me up and said, Eric, I lost the race for the governorship. You're right. I didn't have the votes or whatever. But I need to make $5 million so I can run for the U.S. Senate. And I said, all right, well, let's see what's going on in California. And I'd funded some companies, and I'd built some companies by then. And we decided that there was a new market that was opening up, a really big new market, in which crude oil, which had been habitually used in the United States as our mechanism of fuel, was going to gradually be replaced by biofuel. And so we founded a company called Pacific Ethanol, which was me and the failed governor candidate in January of 2003. We had no cash. We had nothing other than a brand new market that we knew was opening up, which, by the way, is very similar to what you're looking at here. The mobile enterprise connection is largely a brand new market. The idea of your phone and the security demands of the enterprise are largely a brand new market. And I could go on and probably list 50. Start with a really, really big market and then execute. What did we do? We went out with a big idea. Remember, you got to get the capital that then gives you the people the land and the technology. You still got to start with the capital. It's easier to raise capital when you have a big idea, even if it's bad, than if you have a small idea. I'm going to take a sidetrack here because I really love this. If you take an apple and you stick it on a conveyor belt and you run around a warehouse and you stick it in a delivery truck and you drive it for 20 miles and you give it to the lady at the house, she puts it on the table and she pays you $1 for the apple. Most of the people in this room would do the math and say, wait a minute, did you say I got paid $1 for the apple? Yeah, you got paid $1 to deliver the apple. You'd say, there's no way I'm ever going to make that business work. I got to buy an apple, do all that warehousing and distribution and deliver it and get paid $1. It's never going to work. And if the entrepreneur said, yeah, but if you did it 1 billion times, scale is going to make up for the fact you lose money on every apple. Oh, that's a good idea. You know the name of that company? Webvan, W-E-B.V-A-N, Webvan. You know how much venture capital it raised? $1.2 billion. On the dumbest idea in history. It was raised in 1999 and 2000 when any idea that said .com at the end raised capital. So do not discourage yourself that dumb ideas don't get funded. If they're big enough, they'll get funded. You'll then figure out what to do with your business. That one just going away. Back to the real story. We knew there was a big market coming, a really big market, going from nothing to a lot. And so we said we want to build 4 production facilities in the western United States. We want to spend over $500 million building them. We want to become the biggest producer of biofuels in the western United States. Oh, by the way, we don't have the money. We don't have the plants. We don't have anything. But geez, wouldn't it be cool if somebody did that? And so we founded a company and put a name on it, Pacific Ethanol. Really a brilliant name. Pacific Coast of the United States. Ethanol is what we're going to make. That kind of genius was clear because it started attracting people to the idea. Raised a couple million from some local guys just for fun, for running around money. And then went out and optioned some land. And then I found a marketing company. And this was the first stroke of real entrepreneurial genius. I found that marketing guy had done $15 million in revenue, was profitable, but he was desperate to be a producer of biofuels. He was stuck as a guy with a phone selling somebody else's fuel, and he just had an ego desire to be a producer. And so I said, okay, good. I'll buy your whole company. And I'll pay for it in stock of our really valuable company because we're going to build 4 plants on somebody else's $500 million. And he said, good, I'll do that, but you got to get the money. Okay, not a problem. That's easy. Why? Because now we're a 15 million revenues company. And growing. In March of 2005, I found it in January 2003, I signed a deal with him in 2004. In March of 2005, I put his company, our company, into a NASDAQ company that was a little itty-bitty company, making about $1 million a year, with an owner that wanted to get out of it. Put the 3 things together. The little itty-bitty company got a couple percent of it, and we got the rest. Why? Because we were a big company. 15 million in revenue, growing rapidly. 4 months later, Bill Gates, Microsoft, has a little pool of money called Cascade Investments. It's $50 billion. They put $85 million into our business at a $250 million pre-money valuation. Why? Because we're a big company. We're NASDAQ listed. 15 million in revenue going to 40 million. Well, actually, 15 went to 40, yeah. So we were on run rate to 40 million in revenue. We had gone out and optioned, in other words, just signed a little deal saying, I'll pay you money later, 4 sites, and had permits going. So we're obviously going to build $500 million worth of assets. We were easily worth $250 million, and we sold off too cheap to him. It took me 2 hours to close an $85 million investment from Cascade Investments by just describing, guys, we're it. We're going to be the biggest in the Western U.S. You either pick us or you pick the little guy, which one you want to go with. It took 2 hours. With $85 million from Bill Gates, of course, went to Wall Street and said, we're Bill Gates' ethanol company. Aren't we? Wall Street, of course, agreed, and in April of 2006, about 10 months later, funded $146 million into the equity of the company at a $1.1 billion pre-money valuation. The stock, of course, now was Bill Gates' NASDAQ company with $250 million of equity. With $250 million equity, we announced $320 million of debt financing, which means we were fully funded for $570 million to build 4 plants in the western United States, which means revenues, of course, would go to almost $1 billion, guaranteed. So what did Wall Street do? They bought the stock. The company became worth $1.8 billion in the second quarter of 2006. The stock had gone from $1 a share in 2004 to $46 a share, trading $100 million a day. And the biggest problem I had, I couldn't get anybody to sell, except for Bill Jones. Bill Jones and his son made $60 million in cash selling some of their stock during that time period. But Bill Gates had just invested at $8 a share. It's trading at 46. Why sell? It's their problem, not mine. But that's a great problem to have as an entrepreneur. It's when you're calling people up saying, you ought to sell, you got to triple your money and keep half your stock. And they say, no, it's going to go to this guy. I would ask every one of you to listen to that story and put yourself in the position I found myself in. My job was to be a business guy. I was not a technologist. I wasn't the fancy politician. I was just the guy saying, well, what's obvious that we should do at the next step? So we can acquire the capital to get the people and everything else. Pacific Ethanol last year, as a NASDAQ-listed company, did $900 million in revenue. It owns 4 fully operating biofuels plants. It is the largest producer of biofuels in western U.S. It's also the largest marketer in the western U.S. And quarterly, this year, it earned $35 million per quarter of positive cash flow. I sold out in 2006 and founded a company called Aemetis. I won't tell you about Aemetis. It's a story I'll tell you in 2 years. But I would like each one of you to think about the second point I want to make. First point was add value. 2 words, right? Add value. Think about the alfalfa field. Think about Pacific Ethanol, though, and number 2. Number 2 is lead people. Lead people. That's how you raise money. You don't sit down with Cascade and say, would you please help us understand what we're going to do here? You go to Cascade and you say, this is the way the world will be in the future. Are you in with us or not? And if they disagree with you, they just throw you out. If they don't disagree with you, they write a check to you. Money raising is largely around getting people to want to be with you. I've invested in 25 companies. Every one of those was my desire to be on the team of the people that are running that business. How do I communicate? I write a check. It's a permanent relationship. They're stuck to me forever. If they did a lousy job, they're really stuck to me forever, right? When you sit down with funding sources, realize that what they're questioning isn't your business plan or anything else. They're really questioning, do they want a relationship with you? And through money, they can get that relationship. Lead people. That includes people that are giving you money. We all know how important it is to build teams. Lead people. When you wake up in the morning, your job is to lead that team. Lead people. Who are customers? Customers are people that you're adding value to, but you're leading them. You're telling them this is the way the future is going to be. I want to wrap up with a quick request. My last name's McAfee. My family was banished to the Isle of Colonsay 180 years ago. I've been told it's actually a golf destination, which is, I guess, what they do for the places that used to just shove people they didn't like. And I was asked to be a global Scot about 2 years ago. And I said, okay, what are you trying to do? And they said, what we're trying to do is change a culture. We have a culture here in which failure is looked on as being permanent. Can end your career, end your reputation. We have a culture here where people are scared of being ambitious because they can be criticized. We have a culture here in which we've got a tremendous amount of academic infrastructure. We've got a huge chemical industry and an oil and gas industry, and I've founded 4 publicly held oil and gas companies. But we have a culture here of people that are proud of their ancestry and see that as a platform upon which they can go and globalize and execute. And we need some people to come to Scotland and not just teach us how to execute, but to give us that passion and confidence so we can be irrationally positive and irrationally hopeful. Because without that, we're not entrepreneurs. Now, by the way, I just paraphrased what was told to me, and I think I had some eloquence to it. But fundamentally, that's what they asked me to do. And so I said, okay, I can show up and I can tell stories. And unfortunately, that's exactly what entrepreneurs really do. Entrepreneurs really show up and they just tell stories. And from that, the people on their team, the people that they're trying to add value to, hopefully take those stories and say, I want to be a part of that story. I would like each one of you to understand how you're going to be a part of the story of adding value and leading people and getting this little country to reemerge as a global influence. Silicon Valley has about 2 million people in it. I office in Cupertino. For 10 years, I was in the parking lot of Apple Computer. That's how close we are to Apple. There are less than 2 million people in Silicon Valley. You know how many people there are in Scotland? There's a multiple of that. You guys are massive compared to Silicon Valley. I would like the people in this room to see their primary role in life is to add value to this country by leading its people. And no matter what your age is or what you're doing or whether you're an entrepreneur or not, see where you are in that value proposition, wake up in the morning and do something about it. Because without you, all my talking is for naught. That's it. Thank you.